Hello everyone and welcome to Handmade Hero, the show where we code a complete game live on stream. We finished our foray into showing how to do memory management stuff over the past couple episodes, where I showed how to take the same sort of techniques we were using with flat allocations in Handmade Hero and switch them to dynamic allocations if you wanted them to be that way. And so now we can kind of do either one. We have the opportunity now to basically pick and choose. And there's really very little, almost no, game code that really has to change for that. Pretty much all of the game code that we wrote originally can just run on either system, and it doesn't really matter. As long as everything kind of thinks of itself as operating through an arena, there's not a lot of other stuff that we have to do there. And so we could probably pretty flexibly switch between the two kind of models, pre-allocation and dynamic allocation, without really having to think too hard about how our code is working, which is nice because it means that that's not a decision we really have to care about too hard, right? When you know that you can sort of have something be pretty fungible and not have to change very much code, it means that you no longer really have to worry too much about that during your development process, because it's not really infecting other parts of the code with that decision in a way that makes it hard to change. So the best kinds of systems in terms of that flexibility are the ones where you know that your choice is really just kind of free to change and you don't really have to worry too hard about it, because then, you know, when it comes time to ship, you can play around with the options then and see what suits your fancy, and you don't have to sort of have this latent fear in your head gets kind of like, well, if we made the wrong decision early on, it's going to affect all of these other things in the project, and then so we better make sure we get it right, because if we didn't get it right, then it's going to be this huge cost later to try and undo that mistake. So yeah, hopefully I've shown that it really doesn't matter as long as you kind of stick to the principles that we originally established for dealing with arena allocations, that you could pretty much then choose to treat the underlying system however you want, and you can pretty freely switch between dynamically growable arenas, which allow you to use as much memory as you want, or pre-allocated arenas where you're going to guarantee that you've tested your game and you know that if you pick a 1 gig footprint for it or something, that it can stay within that footprint and leave it at that. So you have options there, and hopefully I've given you sort of a good understanding of how both of them work, and so that you can choose which ones you want. But now that brings us to a point in Handmade Hero where I don't really know what we're doing, because we don't have a specific to-do list. Let's see here. So we've got maybe the best things to do now would be to kind of go do some of the cleanup that we postponed. Like I said, I normally don't like to leave bugs lying around in the code base. On Handmade Hero, I sometimes have to, because we're trying to kind of break things up as much as possible into chunks that are like easy for people to sort of watch a continuous through line of the coding. So we tend to sort of put things off a little bit, maybe that we would have investigated a little sooner. So we've got a couple things on here that are that way. And so we've got the fact that our cutscenes were malfunctioning. We've got the fact that the traversable stuff, when we changed over, when we did a little bit of cleanup on our sim region, things aren't set up quite properly. And then we also had sort of this, a little bit of work to do on the arena front, where now that we have the ability to switch between dynamic and static sort of allocated arenas, there is sort of one pass we should sort of do over the code, which is just to maybe make it a little bit clearer how arenas align with each other and how they are cleaned up, so that we know that all of our arenas, we've thought through what's in them now and maybe done a little bit more work on making sure that they're reasonable and logical how they work and who's responsible for what. Because it's good to kind of just lock that down at some point. I think we have enough understanding of how our system works at this point that we should be able to, you know, clean that up a little bit more from where it was for how it kind of randomly grew now that we sort of know exactly what all of the parts are. So I think that seems like a good thing to do, just to start in on this maybe for the next couple days and just kind of finish that stuff up. And I'd like to kind of get to the point where we're maybe gonna tackle this part here, because I do think I want to maybe upgrade things to be a more traditional 3D path as the last thing we do in our engine stuff. And I think that based on my experience and ruminating on it, which I've kind of discussed a little bit, I just really don't like the pure 2D path. I'm glad we tried it. It was my first time ever trying a pure 2D path. I've always written 3D games before. I've really never written a pure 2D game. I sort of maybe did one time, but it was at an indie game jam where I was kind of using a pre-built code base where everything was already done. So I didn't really write much myself, and it didn't have any depth. It was like a fully flat 2D game, not like Handmade Hero is, where there's like this sort of orthographic view. So I'm really pretty heavily leaning towards doing that. So I think what I'd like to do is just over the next couple of days get us to that point, and then do the graphics upgrade, and we'll sort of do a transition to the real artwork with the graphics upgrade kind of in tandem there, so that we can like get absolutely final stuff on all of that, where we're sure that all of our coordinate systems are exactly the way that we want them, because that's the only thing that I really feel like is still kind of up in the air a little bit in terms of stuff that I'm not comfortable writing large amounts of game code on top of, because I just don't like the way it felt. And that 2D stuff with the heavy sorting back end, I really just don't like it. And I think that probably going to a more traditional 3D pipeline there, as much as it would be nice to not have to do, for various reasons, like such as targeting lower end things for fun, like older Raspberry Pis or something like that maybe, I really just think it's probably not going to work in terms of what I would want to do with the game long term, and particle effects and all that stuff. It feels like that sorting is just too heavyweight, and there's really no other way to do it other than to go Z-buffer. And so I feel like what I want to do is just make that call and say, all right, we'll go Z-buffer, and leave it at that. Because there's nothing wrong with using a Z-buffer, right? That's what graphics cards are set up to do. So at some level, it's just like, I don't fight it. I think it's just cleaner to go that way, and we'll let the GPU do its thing. And we'll implement a Z-buffer in our software rasterizer, and off we'll go, right? So I think that's the game plan. At least that's my feeling about it. Excuse me. And at that point, I feel like we'll have done a pretty good tour here, and I don't know what it'll be, about 400 days of just about everything you might want to look at inside a game engine. I mean, we've done so many. It's kind of crazy to think back on how many different things that we've shown how to do on this series. It's been like we've built so many things from scratch. It's crazy. So yeah, I think that that's a pretty good stopping point there, where it'll be like, all right, we've covered. We've given a taste of how to do just about everything that you might be doing in a game engine, because now there'll be some 3D in there as well, and hopefully that's a really good solid base, 400 hours worth of materials that you can jump around in, and then we can just go from there. We'll write the game code, and the part that I like least. But I can't put it off forever. Eventually you have to write the game code if you don't have another person who does that for you. That's what if you had a designer programmer, they would be doing that. And that's really a nice thing if you can find one, but unfortunately designers, good game designers there's almost none of them out there in the world. Most game designers aren't very good, so you don't usually have the luxury of just having someone around who happens to be a good programmer and a very good designer who you can just be like, hey, how about you do that game code stuff? So, like it or not, I am going to have to do that part of it. And yeah, maybe we'll ask some game designers for help if we have any problems that we're like, yeah, this is a game design thing here, not really what I do. So if you want to maybe chime in on some design things, maybe we'll ask John or Daniel or somebody to step in and give us some advice. But either way, that seems like the game plan. So I'm going to go ahead and just start taking a look at some of these bugs here. I don't know if we have any GitHub bugs either. I haven't looked in a while. It looks like maybe we've got one, which would be this one. Obviously, this is not really a bug. This is just an important thing we have to do, right? I'm not sure what this has to do with anything, but not really a bug per se. And so this, I think, is our only bug. And so maybe, and that would be taken care of when we do the graphics update, I think. So I think we're pretty good to go here. So I think we're really just looking at the bugs that we have here. And I'll start taking a look at those now. So if I build the game, I believe what we found was that before, when we did the cutscene stuff, you know, when I ran the cutscene stuff, you hit escape, that jumps out to the cutscene. This, again, the pink screen is a placeholder for our title screen, which is not supposed to be there because no one's done any artwork for it. But then here, when we switch to this black screen here that we're looking at, this should have been showing a the orphanage shot and all that stuff, and it's not. So what I'd like to know is what's going on there. You know, why are we getting this weird black screen? What's happening there? So let's go ahead and take a look at the cutscene stuff and just get a quick make sure that the basic things are happening, and that when we were doing our reorganization, we didn't make some really stupid mistake that's why this isn't rendering, before we dive in any further and take a look. So you can see at least we're calling it, right? We're coming through here. We call render cutscene at time. So that's good. We're taking a look at the shots. And you can see here we got, I guess it's on shot 2 at the moment, or well, shot 1, but the second shot. So that's good. That seems like what we would expect. So we know that we're actually calling render layered scene, which is good. And here on render layered scene, when we're kind of coming through here, we do our little our little camera stuff here and going through doing our push bitmaps. So that all looks good. And so the only question here is like, well, we did change the transform stuff recently. And I do wonder if when we changed the transform stuff, we may not have really done what we needed to do in terms of setting up this stuff properly, right? I don't really know, we haven't really looked much at this, but I don't really know if we thought through what would happen to our cutscene code when we did some of those transform changes. And if I remember correctly, there's kind of like, in the sort group stuff, inside this transform thing, there's a bunch of stuff here, like what the floor Z, chunk Z stuff is, right? And so nowadays, when we pass in an update Z, and in fact, now that I'm saying this out loud, I feel like this is almost certainly what it is. When we pass in one of these things, it was really this Z just becomes a Y offset, if you remember correctly. And the Z that we actually use for displacement is the floor Z displacement stuff, right? And so it's just a case of where we were setting the Z values before. You can see the PZ value here getting set. Where we were setting those Z values before, probably we just have to now set a different Z value to make it flow through the transform pass a little bit more cleanly. So yeah, when we do entity basis, let's see here, basis. When we do this, right, we change this thing to have the distance to PZ be distance above target minus floor Z, right? And floor Z is the value we pass in, and distance above target, right, is just that stationary value. So it's really just this part that's controlling that distance. And so in general, I think if we want our cutscene to be restored to working the way that it used to, then it's really not that anymore in terms of what controls it. It's really the floor Z. So it's really, it's really that, I think, that is what we would need. And, that is probably most of our problem there. Let's take a quick look. I should probably set it up to start in cutscene mode so we don't have to wait for our quote-unquote title screen. But again, I think that's part of it because we weren't properly setting that value at all before. Let's take a quick look at what's going on there. All right. So inside here, our transform offset P has a z value of 0, which is what I want. I don't want it to be offset there. And now we do have a floor z offset of -200. Let's take a quick look here at what's going to happen when I flow through the transform, just so I can get a feel for what else gets used here, right? Hold on a second. So here's my push bitmap call, and somewhere here we should be getting the basis. Dim.basis. So get bitmap dim automatically does that. Never mind. Never mind. But let's take a look at what it returned anyway. So let's see here. Scale 3.77. So I guess what I'd say is it looks like let's just take a quick look here. Here we've got our PZ minus camera offset Z. So that's clearly talking about, that distance there. If we look and see what our z values are, right? Our z values are actually kind of getting further away. The z value kind of goes up, right? That's the opposite sense that it used to be, though. So really, this value is supposed to be flipped around because the floor z goes up towards the screen, whereas our cutscenes were going the other way. So that's another bug in there in addition. So yeah, so I've got at least those two. Those should both be fixed now. I'm trying to think if there's other things that might be tricky inside the transform. Let's see how we're doing here if we were able to fix any of that. Let's see. There we go. Why did that? Let me see here. Why did that not trigger right away? I don't know why. Anyway, so here we are on the floor Z, which I think now is well, that's still going the wrong way. I thought when I looked at this before, I guess it wasn't going the wrong way. Let me just double check, because I want this to be going upward. Like I want the floor Z value to get negative as it gets further away, and I just want to make sure that that's actually what we're doing here. Because I know those Z values in there, I just looked at the ones in the cutscene, they were actually they were increasing as they got further away. Why is that not trigger this, by the way? I guess there's just a pause, a quick black screen in there or something like this. So anyway, here we are with the camera offset Z and the PZ. So I guess this is already negated. We must already negate it when it comes in, I guess, right? And I'm not really sure why that is, but that's apparently how we do it. So where do we get that from? The layer p-value, here it is already pre-negated. So why does that happen? How is that happening? Because these are not negative here, so those must be negated in some other way, right? I guess. I mean, I don't know what else is happening there per se. Let's see. Let's see here. Intro cutscene. Layers P. So interestingly enough, the layers in that actually do have negative Z's. Oh, okay. So that's just the scale I was looking at. I'm just an idiot. I'm looking at the wrong value. So they are negative inside here. I was, for some reason, looking at this. I don't know why. Brain fart. I looked at the last value going, oh, the last value is Z. It's not Z. There's my X, there's my Y, there's my Z. So that all makes sense. So there's that 200, negative 200. So that's actually good. It's going, negatives going backwards into the screen, which is what I wanted. So that's fine. So when we compute this value, here is our computation. This value comes out negative, which is what I want, so I didn't have to worry. That was fine. It's assigned to the floor Z. Now I want to actually not mess up my stepping here. I want to step to see what the transform is that happens there. So here we are in push bitmap. I'm going to step in here, and I'm going to look at the get render entity basis p here, so I can take a look at what happens. So here's my p-value, right? And I'm going to put that in the watch window so I can see it a little bit easier. Here's my x and my y, and those are reasonable because those are the upper corner, so that that seems okay. And let's take a look at object transform offset p as well, just to make sure that that's not, so it's not changing the z value at all, but it's got the x and y in there, and that's fine. All right. So we're not orthographic. We have distance above target is set to what? It's set to nothing, so that's fine. And then we come through here and we say, all right, whatever the floor z is, then the distance away is going to be sort of the negative of that, which is fine, which is 200. There we go. The near clip plane we don't have to worry about because we're certainly not that close to it. Height off of floor is 200. And, oh. Ah, OK. So the z value is still in absolute coordinates there. So we have to then say, because we're using that for y displacement, we have to then also say that whatever the z value is that we pass down, which I guess we can pass the way we were passing, is actually also going to be equal to that, so that they're set equivalently, right? Both things. Let's take a look at what we got there. We may have to step through that one more time just to see what happens after that one. Meow, 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 meow. Meow, 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 meow. OK. So now the cutscene has been restored, and that looks roughly correct to me. So I think we're good. Let me go ahead and just speed us up a little bit here so that we can see what our cutscene looks like later. We really need to work on our debug UI here. This is not in a very efficient way to speed things up. Takes forever. So all of these look like they used to look to me for the most part. Everything seems pretty okay now. I don't see a lot of issues here. Yeah. So I think that's it. It was just that fact that we added the weird floor stuff, and the cutscenes have to run through it. Again, probably another good reason to switch to a more traditional 3D path. I mean, this stuff is so hacky. The sort of 2.5D weird displacement thing just gets very hacky, and the nice part about the 3D stuff is it's been so well kind of hammered on that you kind of know the right way to do things. Maybe, again, it's just that because I'm more experienced in 3D that it feels that way to me. I don't know. But 2D always just feels very hacky to me in that way, and I know it's kind of frustrating. Anyway, so that bug is done. Let's take a look now at the traversables. Again, if you remember what this bug was, it's just that when I run the game, you can see that there's a problem with initial traversables. First of all, those snakes are not supposed to start off on the main character. That's a total bug. There's not supposed to be any way to hop through those trees, right? Those traversables are supposed to be occupied by the trees. They're not being occupied by the trees currently. So there's something about the initial creation phase, which we were sort of working on a little bit, that made it so that the traversables didn't get set properly. And so that's like something that we definitely want to fix. It's the only bug I noticed that got introduced when we did that sort of changeover. And so we want to kind of go through there and figure out why that's happening, like what our problem is there. Because I don't actually know what's causing that. And we want to just fix that one. So let me go ahead and do that. Here is the way that is happening at the moment. So the sim region, I think we sort of switched the packing so that now, like, world doesn't do, world doesn't do the packing, right? What we do is we just have ways to say I want to put something into a chunk or remove something from a chunk, which is this, kind of code here that's just in charge of like bucketing up the world, right? Excuse me. And that stuff is now entirely it's just what the sim region uses to basically stream in and stream out entities from the permanent world storage. Now, the thing is, we then, when we want to create entities, we have a sim region that's open that we use to create the things that we want to create in the world. But what we found is, although most of the things are working properly, that sort of traversable placement stuff isn't working properly. And so what I need to do is take a look at, say, for example, why trees are not being able to occupy their proper traversable points. Now, if we look at when that was happening, I believe it's this code right here. You can see what happens. When you call add wall, you pass it a reference to one of those traversables, which is just like, oh, hey, like I'm talking about this place over here. And that traversable reference is just where the tree is supposed to be placed. And what I don't know is why this code basically isn't working, right? This entity occupying to standing on code isn't working. And we kind of want to look at why that is. So one thing I want to do first is I want to also ask the question of what's happening with those traversable references exactly. Let me take a quick look at how those are working. Let's see, traversable reference. So you can see that it's got an entity reference there and an index. And so it's just saying like, hey, here's the entity I'm talking about. Here's the index of the entity as well. For packing purposes. So let's take a look at just what it's set to in that call, just so I can have a sense of what's even getting passed in here. So here I am in that call when one of those trees is getting passed on to the system. And it looks like, all right, so there's no entity pointer, but there is an entity value. The entity value is 7. And so one of the interesting things about that is at this point, we do have a sim region. So really, that entity pointer should be valid. And the fact that that entity pointer isn't valid is probably 100% of the problem, actually. So inside the play world call, when we're actually adding this wall, when we look up into the room's information, we're not getting back the kind of traversable that I'm looking for. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to go ahead and find out why we're not having entity pointers in there, and that's probably all we really need to do. So inside Handmade world mode, when I have add standard room, here in add standard room, what I'm doing is I'm getting back, right, these traversables from that call. So it's this guy right here that's malfunctioning. He's set up to 0, as you can see. So let's see what happens. So this is probably our entire problem here. We're setting just only the entity standing on index, and we're not setting the pointer. Really, what we want to do is probably the reverse of that now, right? We want to set the pointer. So this is probably just some, you know this code is hacky. This is the hacked world gen code, which we haven't spent much time thinking about. So the fact that that pointer wasn't set is probably most of the problem. In fact, it looks like it was all the problem. So we just weren't setting that pointer, and we wanted to set that pointer because that's when you have a sim region, that pointer is the thing that's actually being used. We were probably just hacking the index ID there back in the day when we didn't have a sim region open, so we were just cold setting the values prior to packing. So I think that's really all there is to that. And now, everyone is properly, you can see that the trees have the highlighted orange debug thing beneath them that lets us know that they're actually standing on that point, which is what we want. There's nothing over there, obviously. And so that's all well and good. Everyone's happy. Everyone's smiling. It's like Christmas morning. It's like the most perfect little Christmas morning when Krampus comes Well, he actually comes before that, but that's beside the point. All right, so that was that bug, and now that bug is gone, and that's all good, well and good. It's 5:30 right now, according to the clock, which means that we have 30 minutes to take a look at something. So maybe cleaning up this arena stuff is the best way to do that at the moment. I'm not 100% sure how I want to go about that, but probably what I want to do is put in something that forces us to explicitly initialize arenas, just so that we can kind of have some kind of attribution as to what arena is what. Like right now, we're using 0 initialization for arenas, which means that an arena can just be set to 0. It can just be cleared to 0, and it will magically start working. I do like that in general. That is how I prefer code to work in general. But in certain cases, there are reasons why that's not so useful. In this particular case, one of the reasons why that's not so useful is that 0 clearing the arenas means that there's really no way for me to put information in there about which arena is which, right? I can't set any debug information on those arenas, for example, because I'm not ever calling anything to initialize them, right? So I literally have no idea what arena is what. And I can't do some kind of trick like store the file and line number of the initializer for the arena, so that when I look through later and go, oh, let's see who's using what memory, I can just go, oh, that's the arena that starts from this part of the code, and this is the arena from the other part of the code. Now we can, just to be clear, we can still gather that data, and we have other ways of gathering that data. The way that we have to gather that data is to do it by arena pointer and use sort of the debug collation system to pick up when people are using various arenas and storing the data that way. So that is also another option, but it's definitely a more involved option than simply having the arenas be initialized. So there's that. The other thing that's true about initializing arenas is I kind of want there to be some attribution of arenas to parent arenas, basically. Like I'd like to sort of have arenas be aggregated up so that you say, this arena is a sub-arena of this other arena, so that if this arena gets cleaned up, that arena gets cleaned up, right? Because typically, even if you want 2 separate arenas for allocations, oftentimes they can both be sort of thought of as getting cleaned up at the same time, and it just reduces bugs if I have it so that at init time I just kind of say, here are the things. It's exactly the same as an arena makes memory allocation simpler, because you don't have to worry about smart pointers or explicitly freeing things or garbage collection or any of this stuff. You can just say, I have an arena, all the stuff for this part of the code goes in it. I know that if I want to just free it all, I just say get rid of the arena, and I don't have to think too hard about it, right? Kind of does everything for me, and it's nice and fast. It doesn't take any time, right? Well, the same thing is sort of true of attributing the arenas. This is basically like saying, hey, arenas sort of have the equivalent of something like a smart pointer, which is to say that an arena can be in charge of freeing a sub-arena, right? And this is just a way of putting that sort of aggregation at a level that I think makes more sense than doing something like individual smart pointers. Because the problem, I've been asked about smart pointers before and why I don't use them. The reason I don't use them is because they're very inefficient. They do a lot of work that doesn't actually need to be done, and cause a lot of code complexity to be introduced that isn't actually doing anything. And that tends to be stuff that I just don't like. I would rather have my code only do things when it needs to do things, if possible. And to a certain extent, C and C++ make it kind of difficult to do that sometimes, because they're not the best languages in terms of high-level constructs, to be sure. But arenas are an example of one relatively easy way you can implement something that gets you out of the business of having all of that crazy smart pointerness and other things like that I don't really feel like are very useful. But that isn't to say that the concept of automatic cleanup is somehow bad. Automatic cleanup is great if you can figure out a way to implement it such that it doesn't do unnecessary work. And with arenas, I feel like you can kind of get a nice sweet spot there where it's like, all right, arenas are all going to aggregate up all of their allocations, so you're not going to have a lot of, hundreds of little smart pointer deletion calls ruining your day. But you can sort of get that same behavior of like, I don't have to remember to free the world arena when I free the game mode arena. I can just know that those two are linked so that when I close down this mode, the arenas involved in that mode will clean themselves up correctly, right? So you can kind of get a nice best of both worlds scenario there where you can have the automation, but you don't have to have any sort of, you don't have to worry about that other, like the sort of pervasive waste that something like a smart pointer inserts into your code base, right? So yeah. So I just wanted to take a quick look at that. One thing that we can do first is just take a look at everywhere we're actually using these things, and just kind of get an idea for that, for how that's working. And essentially we've got a lot of people who are getting it passed into them potentially, but in terms of people who are actually doing it, actually have one themselves. Let's see here. So we have one in the world. What's going on here? Why am I not able to? I don't know why I'm not able to do that. Oh, right. This is, I'm using a version of 4Coder that's a little bit old. I probably should upgrade my 4Coder. I was like, why can't I go next and previous in this buffer? And it's like, because that was implemented in 4.012 or something like this. 4.011, which I don't have installed. But I should. All right, anyway, no real issue there. We can still take a look at this fairly cleanly. So we've got one in Handmade World that at least I thought that I saw one there. Where was it? Inside Handmade World? Yeah, right there. We've got one in Handmade World. And then we've got some in Handmade Hero. You can see them sitting there. We've got like the audio ones, the transient arena, the game mode arena. And then we've got the asset arena, the debug arenas, and that's it. So there aren't very many of these. There's actually very few of them. And yeah, I guess, so one of the things that we can do now if we want to is we could pretty easily start thinking in terms of having the arenas for like modes and stuff like that living inside the mode, which might be a little bit better than it is right now. And the reason that's a little bit better than what we were doing before is just because at the moment we couldn't keep multiple modes around, if that makes sense. Like we could actually create sort of a more robust type of like modal system if we want to. I don't know that we really do want to, though, to be completely honest with you. So yeah, so there's that. Let me take a look at the world arena stuff. Is there actually is it actually using its own? I guess it's not. I guess the world arena is just using whoever it's passed in as. So I'll be honest, maybe there really isn't anything to do here. It doesn't really look like there's all that much to do. Where's the search that I just performed? There it is. There's really not very much to do here. It's pretty straightforward. Gosh. So maybe we just don't need to do anything here. We've kept our memory usage pretty clean, and I could pull that out, but I guess I don't really know that we need to. I could just leave it like it is for now. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm gonna have to say I do not really know. Yeah, like what to do about that. It looks like maybe this is just kind of the way it should be. Let's at least verify that we're not like leaking memory here, though. You can see kind of our memory block situation where we've got our footprint up there. That includes debug, so a lot of that memory is also going to be from the debug system and so on. Let's just make sure that when we switch in and out of these modes that we aren't hemorrhaging any memory here. Like here, for example, we have 76 blocks allocated, and you can kind of see it. It's stable at 76 as the cutscene playing. If I was to switch back into the game, here I've switched back into the game. I've got 77 blocks allocated here. Let's switch back out. We're back down to 76, back in 77. So we've got a nice stable memory footprint. I just wanted to make sure that was the case. So yeah, I guess I won't touch this anymore then. I think that's fine just the way it is. And I don't know that I really want to do this either. I think that that's probably fine the way that it is. So yeah, we're kind of just down to this, which I've got about 20 minutes left, and I don't know that I'm going to make much headway on it here. But in terms of multiple sim regions per frame, yeah, this was kind of just a problem with overlapping, where we couldn't really figure out how we were going to deal with the overlap problem. And I talked about this a bunch, and I don't remember any real solutions to it, unfortunately. Let me see if I've got a... Oh, I haven't rebooted the machine yet, have I? I need to put like a sticky note on this machine to reboot it, so that because the Wacom drivers are no longer working. Remember, they died for some reason. I think when we had that time when we allocated so much memory, we like trashed the machine. When we just like we were allocating without freeing. I don't know if you remember that. Yeah, but I got to remember to do that, because otherwise I won't get the proper tracking. But oh well. So the problem here on day 348, here we go. This is like overlapping simulation. The problem with that was just that we can pretty easily do multiple simulations per frame. So if you think about the game world looking kind of like this, and let's say this is how big a screen is, so very tiny. And maybe there's another screen all the way over here. And like, yeah, there's like, who knows, tons of stuff in between here, but you can like walk between it and whatever. So I could go all the way from here to here, and it's like quite a few rooms away. Well, maybe I want to be simulating something here, and I want to be simulating something here, because maybe up here there's, some NPC who's doing something important. Like maybe let's say there's an NPC who's like looking for the hero and is maybe going to find the hero eventually. So the NPC is like walking along this path maybe, and eventually going to get to the room that the hero's in. So here's the NPC, it's the simulation region would kind of be moving along this path, moving. And then eventually the simulation regions would overlap. And you'd be left in a situation where, like, if this is a simulation region, here's the screen, and here's a simulation region for the hero, right? There would be an equivalent situation where maybe it would look like this for the NPC. And so their simulation regions share a common boundary here. And the problem with that is just that there's no way to reconcile this problem as far as I can think of in my head. Essentially, the only thing you can do that doesn't create some kind of weird buggy behavior is to merge the regions so that your sim region now looks like this. Right? So that's actually fine, right? There's nothing particularly onerous about that. And if it was just the case of, in a typical game, there's one NPC and one hero that need their region simulated, that's probably fine, right? That would just be fine. But the problem is, if you have multiple NPCs and the hero, you can end up in some kind of a state where you've got lots of NPCs close to each other and close to the hero. You end up with a giant sim region that can't be subdivided, and your frame rate would just tank, right? So I don't really have a solution for this problem. I don't know what you do to prevent that from becoming a serious problem, other than just not allowing there to be enough NPCs that you would ever get into a situation where that could occur. Like, you'd force NPCs to only live in their various regions, and, NPCs can't free roam to some degree, right? So we know that, maybe there's one or two NPCs that can free roam and will end up near the hero together, and maybe that's fine. But then the rest of the NPCs who might be simulated stay within predefined areas and won't meet up with each other to create that kind of bad chaining effect. So that's all I'm talking about, right? I hope that makes some sense there. Yeah, but other than that, everything else that we do right now, as far as I know, would just work. Like our simulating multiple regions per frame would just work. I don't know that there's any problems with it. And so then we could have like all kinds of interesting NPC behavior going on and stuff like that. So one thing that might be interesting to know, and I don't really know what it is at the moment, so I'm just going to take a quick gander here, is without, even though it means nothing because we're not really doing anything at the moment, I just want to get a ballpark estimate for if we were running in O2 mode, even just what we've got right now, what are we seeing in terms of a profile hit for, the simulation step, right? So here's update and render entities, right? And here's the clocks for that. What I guess I don't know is what's that looking like in here. So here's debug collation. Here's the game update. Here's game update and render. Inside game update and render, we have update and render world, update and render particle systems, and end sim. Where's begin sim? Is that in update and render world? Yeah, begin sim, execute brains, update and render entities. So these are just really cheap at the moment, I guess, is one thing. So that's kind of nice. Maybe I shouldn't worry about them too much. But yeah, if we were to get back to, let me go back to the root here. If that merged 4 or 5 times, it could get pretty big. I don't know. Maybe yeah, but maybe that's just not a problem. I guess I just don't have enough information to really make any kind of decision about this. I guess maybe what I should do is just cross my fingers and go, all right, well, until we actually have real world scenarios running, there's no way to make some kind of a priori determination of like what's going to happen here. So maybe the best thing to do is to just say, let's go ahead and, let's thread this thing. And see if we just do multi-threaded world update across multiple threads, like we do with our render or whatever. Let's just try that out and see if we have that happen. Make sure that that's all working fine, and then we'll call it a day. What I don't know at the moment is how we would really debug that sort of stuff necessarily. Let's zoom out here. Because we're probably going to need some kind of a debug view, right? I mean, like, we could use like a view kind of like this one, where we can see more stuff. Unfortunately, our current renderer is not really set up. It's only set up to render things relative to a particular camera. I guess what we could do is just force the other sim regions to render as well, like in debug mode. We could force them to render out so that we could have sort of more things going. I don't know. Let's play around with this for just one quick second here. I'm going to go ahead and see what I can do in terms of creating more entities. We probably need something. We probably need some way of dealing with creating worlds that we don't really have a way to create big worlds right now. We can store them and process them just fine. We just don't have a way to really create them at the moment. So that's a bit of a problem. But here we go. Let's just see what happens if I create a tiny world, but that just happens to be bigger. So if I go ahead and let's take a look here at the world. So yeah, if I go out here, this is just a really long world, right? This world just keeps going and going, right? So what I kind of need to do, and let me re-enable that. Make sure that we can actually make our game kind of go around a little bit more than that. Here we go. So yeah, so you know, I guess what I'm saying is, at the moment we have a way to do a debug camera of that form, but we don't have a way to do a debug camera of like this form, where it's like super wide out, and instead of just showing what's in a simulation region, which is what we're showing right here, I would want to do something where we've got a little bit more, you know, information on the screen. Like, so if we had multiple sim regions, we'd see all of them. Yeah. Let's just try that. Let's just see what that would entail. I've got 8 minutes left. Let's see what happens if I just play with that a little bit. So in world mode, let's see what happens here. We sort of have this idea that, you know, we start the sim here. We are looking for controller input here. We update the brains here. We render things, and then we finish, right? So if we wanted to talk about a single unit of that, right, like a single one of those, I should be able to pull that out into a more coherent like thing. So we do update and render world. I should be able to do something here where I've kind of got another one of those, like a function here, that's going to be a little bit more concise. So, you know, let's say we've got this begin sim call. Let's see where the sim region's actually used. And you can sort of see the sim region bounds getting used there in the rect outline stuff. And then this getting used here. So let me just pull it at the sim region part, sim region to sim region, right? So where we do sort of the temporary memory block. In fact, where is sim memory itself? It's right here. So yeah, let's do this. So here is a sim step, right? This is like, you know, simulate something like this. Or this is like do sim region, I don't know. So here's update and render sim region, and this thing, you know, does all the stuff that we would normally do. Now, essentially what I want to do is kind of predicate this. I'd like to say, you know, are we accepting controller input, you know, or aren't we? And I don't know if the best way to do that is to do that here, or if that is something that we should sort of have this be in stages that happen. I'm not sure. But let's just make it be an if at the moment. So like if flags, allow controller, or allow like spawning, I don't know, something like that. There's the brains happening, update and render entities, and update and render particle systems, and then we end, right? So we've got all that stuff, and I guess part of the problem, at the 5-minute warning, I'm probably not going to want to do much of this. So I probably will just leave this where it is at the moment, because what I realized too is we have some stuff baked in there that we don't want baked in there. Like if we go to nsim, I think we've got some stuff in here that we don't really want. Like we've got the camera following entity stuff. I guess that's okay, because if I render somewhere else, that entity wouldn't be on there. But I think we need to be more careful about that sort of stuff, if that makes sense. All right. So let's see, frame-to-frame camera delta p, and all that stuff needs to get set. So let me just see what we need in here. So we need camera bounds and meters, this sim bound stuff. This stuff I think can actually, sim bounds expansion, I think that stuff can actually be kind of over here still, or maybe put inside the sim stuff itself. Let me just take a quick look in here and say, let's put that there. So here's the Tran Arena stuff for begin temporary memory. So let's say that we pass, do we need the Tran state for anything else? No. The update and render entities does need it, I guess. So I guess we need the Tran state in there. We're going to want to pull some of this stuff apart, I can totally tell. But, oh, whoops, world mode. There we go. And world is just off of world mode, I believe. So we don't really need to pass that in. Sim bounds should probably be passed in, right? And input, so this is one way we could do it. We could just say, if you passed us an input, then we'll process input. Otherwise, we won't. Let's see, rectangle 3, my bad. Boop. So then we need a render group, screen bounds, and game state. I feel like we're going to have to, and maybe this would be good too. I think this would be nice if we could spend a little time cleaning this stuff up. We've got too many structs of stuff that probably we could consolidate and be a little bit more judicious about those things. Would probably be good. Let's see. Mouse P. It's got too many. We've just put all the stuff into this code. It does it in one pass, and that's fine, but it just feels like now is a good time that it's complicated enough. We're going to want to sort of extricate, pull some of those, or exfiltrate perhaps, some of that stuff out so that it's not in there when we're just trying to do like basic sim stuff, if that makes sense. So really, screen bounds is not something we have to draw in here, I don't think, but we might need that for other reasons. So I guess I'll pass it for the moment. Rectangle 3 screen bounds. We do need the render group. There we go. And background color, I don't know what background color is there for. Oh, for our fade out effect, right? Yeah. Draw buffer. What are we using the draw buffer for? curious to know. Like, what does the draw buffer do inside entity, update and render entities? Draw buffer. I can't see because it's behind my head. Let's try that again. Draw buffer. So it's just for putting the alpha floor clip rect in. So really, the only reason that we have to do that at all is just because the width and the height are required to do the push rect in the case where we're not even trying to push a clip rect. We just wanted to have a way of saying, hey, we've got that alpha floor render target that we wanted to target, and we needed it to do that. So that one's like definitely the case too, where it's like, you know, you can see how there's just too much stuff that needs to be kind of pieced apart there. So yeah, I definitely think that this is a good thing to do tomorrow to get into some of this, stuff. All right, so I'm just going to leave it just to leave ourselves in a functioning state. I'm going to leave it like it is here, and right after we do sort of our simbound stuff, I'll call that function. But yeah, I think that's too much. And so pulling some of that stuff out and like separating out the responsibilities there so we have more control over who needs what and when will just allow us to have sort of a little bit better division of labor in there. So let's go ahead and go to the Q&A for now. If anyone has any questions, now's the time to ask them. What happens if you jump on this? That's awesome. It like tried to jump but couldn't move the head through. It's trying to jump to the other one. Remember, because this was for jumping up and down floors. That's hilarious. It can't move the head through the trees, though. Hysterical. So I wonder if we moved it down one, if it would be able to, right? Like if we were to say, in add standard room, there was a thing that's like, oh yeah, auto boost or whatever it is, the offset Y, like, if that was moved down on the left hole. Oh, come on. Get out of my way. Guys. Uncool. Here we go. So the problem is that one's still up at the top there. So we need to get that one down. All right, seriously, get off the thing. Lame. There we go. I kind of like these boost squares. I think I'm going to put these boost squares to good use. Like when we actually do some real rendering here of like some artwork, I think it would be funny if you could jump on things and have them kind of boost you around like that. I don't know. It's looking really cool. I'm gonna keep that in there. Will the switch to 3D affect the artwork for Handmade Hero? No, we'll keep the artwork basically the same. Yes, you can ask an off-topic question. Generally, what I do is I give precedence to any questions that are on topic. But if there aren't any on-topic questions, then I just use the time to answer off-topic questions. Lori says, "Hi, I'm way behind you in the series, but you talked about mixin. I don't know if you did this yet, but can you please explain it?" So one of the problems with that term, of course, is that different people use it for different things. So I'm not even sure if you look it up whether it's used. It's kind of an object-oriented term that is not maybe as clear as it needs to be. But here you go. And essentially what it's trying to talk about is just the fact that you can, sort of consider making something that's just a bunch of different things combined together, rather than the sort of C++, the early C++ idea of object-oriented programming, which is kind of broken, which is that like things inherit from other things, which is not usually a very good way to build things. And other object-oriented languages don't have that problem. Like that's not endemic to all object-oriented programming languages. More powerful object-oriented programming languages than C++ don't think of object-oriented programming in that way. But essentially all a mixin is a mixin is just saying, well, I want to be able to create, especially in like a game-like setting, I often want to be able to create objects that just have a bunch of properties that I want them to have. And I don't want to have to really think about how that's constructed, right? I don't want to have to think about like, oh, this creature inherits from human so that it can have like bipedal locomotion, and then but then I kind of want it to have mandibles like a spider, but I can't inherit from spider because I can only inherit from either human or spider because human and spider both define locomotion. You can only have one or the other, blah, blah, blah. So mixin is just the concept that like, hey, you just grab what you need from where you need it. And so, for example, you could grab the locomotion from human. Bipedal locomotion is a thing that you can grab. And then mandible is the thing you can grab, and it's just kind of like this sort of piece together parts to make the thing that you were trying to make. So that's all a mixin is just that concept, and C++ kind of really sort of poops the bed, kind of browns the bed a lot. When it comes to being able to support mixins, they do a really poor job of it because there's a bunch of stuff it can't do, like referring to outer scopes, and there's all these reasons why mixins don't really work correctly in C++ that are not inherently problems with the concept of object-oriented mixin. They're just problems with C++. What else is new? And so typically what ends up happening is if you want to actually implement mixin in C++ for something that you're doing, typically you end up kind of writing the system yourself, which is what we did as well, right? We have the idea of like sort of giant mush entity model thing that's designed to give us certain benefits of mixin-like stuff. And, that's typically what almost every game engine does. Like almost no game engines that I know of any prominence try to use C++-like features to do mix-ins. Because really all C++ that you do there is either multiple inheritance, which doesn't really work very well for a number of reasons, or you just have a class that has members of the things that you want, and that also doesn't work very well because you can't iterate over them properly, and there's all these other problems with it, right? So typically what almost every game engine does is they end up implementing their own mix-in, right? And either exporting it to a scripting language or just using it inside C++, their own system somehow of doing that, either with like lists attached to the entities or whatever else, to basically compensate for that fundamentally flawed C++ problem, right? Are you working on entity interactions soon, like fire weapons versus ice monster, poisonous arrows, and stuff like that? Probably not. I wouldn't think so. Tiny construct, very off topic. Can you think of the last time you took a dynamic programming approach to a problem, e.g., shortest edit distance, optimal BSTs, etc.? DP algorithms are allegedly a common interview topic, despite how silly that seems. So I guess I can't say that I've used one recently. I mean, so depending on your view of what you would consider a proper dynamic programming approach, there are definitely types of things that programmers often write without thinking about them as being dynamic programming problems that do have the structure of memoized dynamic programming, right? And hopefully this is a term, yeah. So to give an example, first of all, let me just say what dynamic programming is. So because I'm sorry, I can't really think of one I've done in the past couple months, let's say. So what dynamic programming is dynamic programming is usually about a bottom-up approach to a problem. So for example, most of the time you think about things where, you'll think about sort of divide and conquer. Oops. Or something like this. As kind of a programming strategy or whatever, where you might think about constructing things like, a binary tree or something. And so the idea is, you have some top-down approach to something where you're trying to divide stuff up into more manageable pieces, right? And so you tend to think about coming at things from this perspective, where, we've divided stuff up and we're kind of like, the way that we're sort of optimizing this algorithm is by partitioning what it's working on into a way so that it only works on the things that it actually needs to work on, right? So, a lot of stuff that we talk about falls into this category, but dynamic programming is sort of about doing, a slightly different way of thinking about that sort of thing. Rather than thinking about it in this way, it's like thinking about it in terms of, let's start with all of the stuff that we have and just start working with it. And then what we'll do is we'll build up from there. So, we'll do some stuff on these 3 elements, but then we'll remember that we did that. And then we'll do some stuff on these 3 elements and remember that we did that. And then later when we need to do stuff on all 6 of these elements, we'll just reuse the stuff that we did from those pieces, right? And so sort of if you want to think of dynamic programming as just the act of saving work that you've already done to reuse it later in a way that builds upon that work, that is the sort of thing that programmers can often write without thinking that they were doing anything dynamic programming. Like they may not even know the term dynamic programming, but that's still kind of dynamic programming. And so the thing that came to mind was let's say that you're storing stuff out to disk, right? And like, oh wait, no, we did one. I was like, God, it seems like we should have done one in Handmade Hero. We did do one. The graph sorting. The graph sorting in Handmade Hero does do this, right? So here is. Sorry, I was like, God, it seems like we should have used something that was deceptively dynamic programming. So yeah, remember our sorting stuff, right? Where we did sort entries. So remember how this thing worked? We did a thing where we'd say, okay, like we built a sprite graph, and then we did a recursive front-to-back sorting, right? And the way we did that is we would go through and we'd sort things, but when we sorted them, we would mark them as having been visited, right? So later, when we were sorting things that contained that part of the graph, we wouldn't resort that part of the graph. We'd just know that we'd already sorted that part and could just point into it, right? That's sort of dynamic programming, right? We didn't partition this ahead of time into connected subgraphs, which we could have done, and then sort the subgraphs. We instead just started sorting, and we remembered every time we did sort, so that if somebody else was coming in who also needed to insert themselves into that sort, they just could. Does that make sense? Tiny construct, does that help at all? Because that's sort of like a more, a fairly light but traditional concept from dynamic programming, right? Is just like, hey, we start sorting this graph. We remember that we sort parts of it. Well, we don't really remember that we sort parts. We just have ways of knowing if we sorted parts of it. And then it's like, hey, don't sort that again. We already sorted it. Rather than keeping the graph in some structure that we know which parts are which. Miblo asks, how about movable boosters that you can set up to chain boost you? Yeah, I mean, we support it, right? All right. So anyway, Tiny Construct, I hope that answers the question a little bit. In terms of like more traditional, like named, traditionally named dynamic programming algorithms, I don't know that we've definitely not used them on Handmade Hero, and I don't know that I've used one recently. I am implementing some compression stuff right now, and it's not entirely out of the question that some dynamic programming might happen on the 1935 code base in the next couple of weeks. But it depends. Like some of the stuff with like, forwards optimal parsing and stuff like this sort of stuff, it's entirely possible that I might use something from dynamic programming in a compression, in a dictionary compression stuff kind of thing. But DS Jim Inez. So part of the dynamic programming question mentioned the coding interview. Do you do one for new hires? Well, we don't really hire any programmers at Molly Rocket. I'm the only programmer. We pretty much only hire artists. And no, we don't ask them about dynamic programming. I guess what I would say is I never ask. I've said this before, and I'll say it again just briefly. In my mind, any interview that involves an interview question of that nature is not a good interview, and will not produce good results. So my reasoning for that is that I have not known really any programmers ever where their ability to answer a question that they were unfamiliar with had anything to do whether they were someone that I wanted to program with or that I would trust to write a good program. It is literally unrelated. Pretty much every, even the very greatest programmers that I've known, their good answers to questions come only after they have had a chance to think about those questions and internalize them on their own time, right? And I think this is true of pretty much everybody. Like, you know, if I walk into someone's office at RAD or something and start talking to them about a problem, there's only two reasons that I'm doing that. Well, I guess technically there might be three. One is because I think they know more about this already than I do, right? Like maybe I want to walk into Charles Bloom's office and talk to him about compression. I'm not doing that because I think he's so smart that he's just going to suddenly know compression really well and have some great things to tell me about the problem I was working on. I just know he's a compression expert. So I know he's already spent tons of time thinking about these things. And that's where his smart's, right? You know, like he's a very smart person who's spent a lot of time thinking about that. So that's why I want to have a whiteboard discussion with him about compression. It's not because I think he's just instantly going to know answers that other people didn't know or something like that, right? So that's one. Two might be if I just want to talk it through myself. So I've been thinking about this problem a lot, and it's about compression. And maybe I'm talking to someone who doesn't know anything about compression, but that's okay, because I know they're smart and will just ask questions or prompt me. And it's really about me thinking it through, not about them thinking it through, right? Or third, it's if I want that person to think about it over time. So like, okay, I'm going to go into their office and just talk about it, say, hey, think about this. Let me know, we'll talk about it again tomorrow or something like that, right? I have literally never thought, let me go into this office of this person who doesn't know anything about this subject matter, and I'm going to ask them this question, and I'm going to expect them to have any insight into it at all right then. That's not a thing. I don't care about it. I don't care how well they can do it. It makes no difference to me what someone can think about in 30 minutes. It's irrelevant, right? So the fact that this exists in coding interviews boggles my mind. It makes no sense. I think it has nothing to do with whether you're a good programmer. I think it has nothing to do with whether you'll be a good employee. I think it has nothing to do with whether you'll be successful at that job, no matter what that job is, because the thing that you are doing in that moment is literally 100% unrelated to any job function you will ever have in that capacity. Full stop. So I think the much more intelligent way to run a tech interview, and I've said this many times on stream, is the way Chris Hecker taught me how to do it. And unfortunately, he's still never written this up. I've asked him many times to do it. He has not, but I've explained it before. And that is, a properly run tech interview is you read the person's past work history, and you begin by asking them a series of get-to-know project questions about something in that history. So for example, let's say that, going back to the compression example, let's say that the person says on their resume that they did a bunch of work on compression in school or at their previous employer. So I'm going to say, oh, tell me a little bit about what you did with compression. Okay, what was the most interesting parts of that for you? Tell me, give me some background so that I can get to know the candidate's project like what they were doing on something that they said they did a bunch on, right? Then you pick some specific thing that they've mentioned there and you drill down on it to generate a proper interview sort of problem out of what they have given you. So you find their core competency, like what they are comfortable with and what they said they've worked on. Then you build the thought problem out of that. It's like, oh, we get down there and it turns out that they started mentioning LZ compression. I'd be like, oh, okay, so LZ compression's kind of interesting, right? Like, tell me about how you coded your, LZ, when you were outputting the symbols. What did you use for a back end? Oh yeah, why did you choose that? Oh, so what do you think about arithmetic encoders? Like, did you try one of those? Like, why did you choose Huffman? Oh, it was for speed purposes. So what kind of architecture was this, like, that you were doing it on, and blah blah blah. So you want to build out and find out how well does this person think through the problems that they've actually worked on. How well do they retain that knowledge? Can they explain it to you? Are they able to answer good questions about trade-offs that they should have thought of at that time? Have any of these things ever occurred to them? Blah, blah, blah. That's how you do it. And I find that correlates very highly with whether somebody is capable of doing good programming. The one thing that it does not screen for, and I have no idea how you actually screen for this. It's the one thing that I have no idea how you can actually determine. The one thing it does not screen for is productivity. So this interview technique, much like the brain teaser one, as far as I know, this interview technique has no downsides that other interview techniques don't also have. And it has none of the other downsides that those interview techniques do have, except for one, which they all share, which is that you can have someone who's just a very smart, very capable programmer who just never is capable of sitting in front of their computer and actually programming, right? So they may be somebody who gets almost no programming done every day, not because their brain isn't totally capable of thinking it through and being smart about it and understanding it and writing good code and all of those things. They just never do it. They like to talk all day or go to coffee or who knows what else, right? And this is a huge problem. So I don't know how you figure that part out. I have no idea. Maybe you look at the person's track record, or maybe you just contract them for 6 months and see if they actually are doing work. I don't know. But what I can tell you is that as in terms of screening whether the person is capable of writing good code and capable of understanding things, Chris Hecker's interview is the right interview process. I'm pretty positive that is the way you go. Interviews that revolve around a prefab question are awful. They are just a bad idea. I have no idea why they are popular. I can pretty much guarantee you they just do not produce good, reliable results. I think they end up biasing you towards candidates who happen to have seen questions like that before, which is not an indicator of their ability to solve interesting new problems. They bias you against people who are nervous or aren't fast on their feet. Some of the best programmers you will come across are not comfortable interacting socially that way with people, especially in a situation where they may feel intimidated, right? I think I think that's true pretty much across all demographics. Like I think that no matter who you're looking at, there's a high degree of chance that you might get somebody who would be a very good programmer, but they will feel intimidated or threatened or just plain nervous in this scenario. And even if they would be capable on their own time of doing an excellent job on the thing you're asking them to do, they just won't be able to in this situation. And again, not a job skill, right? Like having someone respond well under fire, not a job skill of a programmer. A programmer sits in relative quiet with no threatening persona or intimidating watchful eye hovering over them with their job on the line every day. That is not at all the environment in which a programmer should be working. And if that is the environment that your company has set up, you've got problems, right? So inherently, what you're sort of screening for in addition in that interview process, not only is this person familiar with this arbitrary subject matter that we pulled out of a hat, like maybe they've just never done dynamic programming before. Who cares? You can learn dynamic programming in a week. Less than that if you don't need to learn like a ton of different variants on it, right? So who cares if they've ever seen that? It's irrelevant, right? But if someone's never seen dynamic programming before, they're probably not going to be comfortable working on a dynamic programming problem. It's going to be very new to them, and they're going to need a day or two for it to sink into their brain, like what it means and how they might apply it and that sort of stuff. So why are you asking them that question? That's just dumb, right? It doesn't make any sense, and it doesn't give the interview candidate a chance to demonstrate whether they're a good programmer or not, right? So you need to make them comfortable. You need to put them on their own turf and ask them questions about things they have become familiar with to see how familiar did they become with them. They had plenty of time to do this thing at their previous employment or in school. What did they do, right? And how did they do it? You can find that out from them. You don't need to make some stupid question like, can you prove that there are two places in the world on opposite sides of the globe that have the same temperature or something else stupid like this? Let's see here. So I really should probably get going soon. We're way over time here, but I'm just looking to see what there's a lot of questions all of a sudden. Is there any time you've talked about deep learning? No, I have not. I'm also not super knowledgeable about learning-based algorithms. I may have like limited experience with some of them, but definitely not anyone like that is probably the current kind you might see. Like neural networks. I've never done a neural network algorithm. Speaking of past jobs, would you rather see a job at a Java shop versus a local college's faculty for high-performance computing? Again, I don't care. I'm not the one to ask because I don't really hire people, right? Like if we ever hire people at Molly Rocket, there'll be probably very few people, and there'll probably be people I know already, right? So my opinion on how to hire is not that relevant in terms of people seeking employment. I feel like the advice I have to give on that is just more like if you're trying to hire people, and don't do the things that Google does, for example, I think they just have a really bad hiring process. And not to be too glib about it, but I think it kind of shows in the quality of their software too. But that's a separate issue. Anyway, I feel like you kind of need to think that through in terms of hiring. But in terms of getting a job, I don't have much to say because I'm not the kind of person who's hiring for most of the available positions out there. It's more like the type of people who are hiring are more like the kinds of people who tend to think that it's cool to ask a stupid question in an interview about some puzzly weird thing, right? As for if you're just asking out of curiosity what I'd rather see, I don't care what's on a resume as long as there's something on it I can ask about that will allow me to tell whether this person is a good programmer or not, right? If the thing is like just, I don't know, I did JavaScript programming for websites or something, maybe it's going to be hard for me to drill down to anything interesting enough to really find out. But most other things that probably there are, like certainly a high performance computing lab, I could easily ask questions that would tell me how well you can think through these problems, what kind of experience you've had, what how you applied yourself there. Certainly that would have it. And at a random Java shop, again, it depends what you were working on, but probably there are things in whatever that job was that I could, ask about to find out how you are at learning to program and learning new things and flexibility and all that sort of stuff, right? Jim Inez, great interview. So the only issue I've had with that is candidates who have no projects they're proud enough to really talk about, and I feel like I'm judging them unfairly for not having the same interest for programming outside of work or class. Well, I don't think that should be the case, though, because if they've had enough experience to be applying for the job at all, like, they have to have written a lot of code. Like, if you haven't written enough code, then that's just, like, you're not going to be a good programmer. So you might as well just end the interview there, right? Having written enough code that there's something in your past we can talk about is kind of a requirement. You don't have to be proud of it. You just have to have done it, right? So there has to be something there. And if there isn't, then that's just probably a no hire, because you kind of need, like, there are no good programmers who haven't done a ton of programming. So, even entry-level people, I would expect them to have done a lot of programming at school. It doesn't have to be outside of their assignments, but they had to have done all their assignments at least, right? And wherever they were working, they had to be doing stuff at work, right? So. What are some things that can cause a smart individual who has a good understanding of programming not to be productive, and what can be done to eliminate these causes? I don't know. I have no idea. I pretty much always program for 4 hours a day, every day at a minimum. Like, even at my slowest, it's real rare for me to go a day without 4 hours of programming in it, right? I'm talking about a work day. And, most good programmers I know have something like that. And I don't know why they are that way, right? I definitely know programmers who I'd say these people are very smart. They're not necessarily good programmers because they just don't get it done, right? And writing code is not the only thing you'd be doing, right? Like, for example, Fabian has famously said that, sometimes he works stuff out in notebooks and just reads things for, several days at a time, and then just writes the code and it's done and it's great or whatever, right? So it's not necessarily typing in code, but it's doing actual productive work for 4 hours a day, I think, is kind of what you would expect a programmer doing. And there's some people who just don't do that, and I don't know why. I just have no idea why. I don't know if it's brain chemistry or if it's bad habits or something, but not being a manager, I don't really have to worry about that. At Mali, we pretty much only hire people who, are going to do basically the same thing. For art, we do exactly the same. It's we want people who we know are working no less than 4 hours a day, at a bare minimum, because we know that if everyone's doing at least that much work every day, you get a fair bit of work done every week, right? Whereas people who just talk all the time or surf the web or whatever else, that's just not useful. It's not work. That's like playing around or whatever. Rome 00010011. But people do come with big claims on their resume. You got to at least ask about pointer math if you're hiring a C expert. No, I mean, this is the point, is drill down questions get to all that stuff, right? Like, you would be shocked how fast you can figure out that someone has no idea what they're talking about when you drill down on something in their resume, right? Like, it comes out quickly. You know what I mean? And so it's like, it's really not, you don't have to ask reverse a linked list kind of questions. It's really obvious when you drill down into something that they can or can't do this stuff. Because, when I say drill down, you go all the way down to like the code. Eventually, you will be coding on a whiteboard when you do that style interview, right? You're like, oh, okay, like the LZ question, like how you're coding this thing. All right, so how did you, what was the cache, behavior of that thing or whatever? You get all the way down to those things, and it's really obvious if somebody doesn't know, what a pointer is or something by the time you're dealing down at those, at the specifics, Chachma, who wouldn't know how to reverse a linked list? You can do that on the spot. Well, again, like two things about that. One is, I don't know. Who knows why you couldn't reverse a linked list on the spot? Maybe you're flustered or confused or something, right? Like maybe you're bad at taking interviews. Who cares, right? Reversing a linked list is something you almost never do. I can't even think of the last time I ever made code to reverse a linked list. It's like, of all the things that I type in many times in programming, reversing a linked list, I've maybe done once, if even that. It's just really, it doesn't make any sense. Like, why would that be the kind of thing you would ask when it's just not relevant to programming most of the time, and the only thing you're going to learn from it is whether this person is not flustered. That's by having a thing thrown at them that they either have never done before, or if they've done it, it's only because it was a toy problem they chose to work on, right? It just doesn't make any sense. It's either zero information or wrong information is the only two things you're going to learn from that question. So drill down on something that matters. What has the person done? Get them to recreate some of that code that they've already done on the whiteboard for you. That is way more useful and way more telling about the person and their qualities as a programmer than throwing an interview question at them that they probably have never seen before unless they practiced for it on stupid questions like reverse a linked list. That's just... When was the last time you wrote code to reverse a linked list? Like, why did you do it? What were you doing? What code were you writing to reverse a linked list? Why did you build the linked list in reverse order in the first place? Like, seems inefficient to me. Maybe I should ask you why you're asking me to reverse a linked list. If an interviewer asked me to reverse a linked list, maybe I would tell them, hey, why did you build the list backwards? Now you're touching all of those potentially unrelated cache lines. That sounds like a horrible idea. Often I have a hard time digging into people's past projects because they throw out tons of acronyms, jargon, frameworks, etc. that I'm not familiar with. Maybe they've worked in a completely different industry like medical or defense, and their work context is totally unfamiliar to me. How do you handle that? So the way that I handle that is make them teach you. That's perfect. If you go like, so it says here on your resume that you made like a mailing list subscription thing. Like how, tell me about that. What's the deal with that? It's like, oh yeah, for our website, we needed a thing where you could type in the mailing list and address and it would subscribe you to it. It's like, oh, okay, so how did you implement, the thing that stores the mailing list? Like, what was that? And then they're like, oh, that was, ProSQL. I'm making up something that, well, actually, that probably exists. But let's say that ProSQL doesn't exist for the sake of the argument. oh, yeah, we use like a ProSQL backend or something like that. You'd be like, oh, what's ProSQL? And they'll be like, oh, it's a database variant by such and such a company. Or there's like, oh, okay, so tell me about the deployment of that system. Like, what does that system look like? Like, okay, tell me about the queries for that system. How did the queries work? It's like, blah, 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 blah. Like, make them go all the way down to like the actual code they wrote. And if you don't know the acronyms, so much the better. Force them to explain all the way down to the actual code one thing that they did. And if you don't know the acronyms, it doesn't matter, because that's even better. That means they're going to have to explain all of that to you. And if they can't explain to you what they did, they obviously don't understand it very well, right? Like, being able to explain what you programmed is a core job function, because if you're going to work with anyone else, you need to be able to explain to them what's going on. So if they can't tell you what it is they did, that's a great situation. Sean McGrath, I like this interview methodology. Maybe in a chat stream one day you could mock interview someone as a demonstration. Yeah, I was just having that thought. In fact, I was going to say, is anyone on stream right now that I can just like conference in, and I'll just interview them the way that I think you're supposed to do this interview so that you can see? And you can't call this the Casey Muratori enhanced interview techniques, because Chris Hecker is the person who invented it, as far as I know. I mean, maybe he got it from somewhere, but I don't think he did. I think he just came up with it, because he was at Microsoft and he did a bunch of interviewing. And Microsoft was kind of the pioneer, as far as I know, of the stupid interview question technique. And Chris, specifically did not think that was a good idea, much to his credit, and came up with this as an alternate way to interview people, and it's very good. All right, Sean, yeah, I'd totally do the interview. That sounds great. Some other time we'll do it. And you can stream from your computer with the whiteboard on, so that when it comes time to actually scratch things out that I'm asking, you can draw them on there. Super Jercom, this is actually already how I do interviews. The problem is people tend to be totally blindsided by being asked about their own experience. Yeah, one of the problems now is people buy these books like How to Prepare for an Interview, and of course they're all to prepare you for these really crappy Google-style interview processes. And so they're all practicing these stupid questions that is not at all if you actually end up getting a good interviewer, the candidate is now totally surprised, because they're like, oh, I thought you were going to ask me a dumb brain teaser question or something, right? So, unfortunately, one problem is that people aren't coming prepared for a good interview. They're coming prepared for a bad interview, which, yeah, does make it a little harder. But I still think it's hey, if you can't talk about your past experience after 5 or 6 minutes of just getting more comfortable with me, I mean, that's going to be a problem, right? And that's another thing that I would point out is true about this interview process, is it's impervious to hacking, right? One of the problems with the random brain teaser question problem is that there's only so many of those that people tend to give out, and now they just have books with them in it, and so now people can just practice, and maybe the only thing they know about programming is how to answer that question, right? But if you do the drill down method, then the person has no idea where you're going to go with that drill down, right? Because typically what you do, and this is sort of the Chris Hecker style, is he generally does a sort of Venn diagram approach to it, where he takes something as the drill down proceeds. He finally gets to some part in the drill down where he has a kind of area he wants to explore that's right nearby, and he makes the candidate go there, right? So it kind of like builds off of the candidate's comfort and just out into a little bit enough new that the candidate has to kind of do a little inventing. And since there's no way to really know what that's going to be, you can't really practice for it, right? You know, the only thing you can really do to practice for it is to be a good programmer and know what you did. Like, be comfortable with the things that you've done and be prepared to provide insight in those areas to somebody, which is exactly what you actually, is exactly the experience we are hiring you for, right? So it's the only way you could hack it is by being better at the actual thing we actually wanted you to be, right? Because nobody expects you to come to a job with experience you didn't say you had, right? And nobody expects you to come to a job being able to solve random brain teasers. So, you know, the other things that the things that are encouraged by the other interview process are basically just burning the candidate's time on stuff we don't actually care if you can do when you actually show up here to work if we hire you. Whereas anything you might do that would get you better at interviewing on Chris's process is actually just making you a better programmer and making you more experienced at the things that you actually claimed you were on your resume, which is all win-win for the most part. So, all right, now I really got to go. It's almost 7 o'clock. Okay. And I got to reboot the machine, so I'm going to close this stuff down, and we're going to reboot so I can get some better so I can the Wacom tablet back online. All right, thank you everyone for joining me for this episode of Handmade Hero. It's been a pleasure coding with you as always. If you would like to follow along at home, you can always pre-order the game on handmadehero.org. It comes with a source code, so you can do your own experiments with it and learn from it. We also have a forum site you can go to ask questions. We have a Patreon page you can go to if you want to support the video series. There's a schedule bot that tweets the schedule at you, an episode guide you can use to catch up on old episodes, and of course, a little button that tells you the next time we're going to be live. If you refresh the page, it'll just count down to the next showing. That is about it for today. I will be back here tomorrow for the last stream of the week. Until then, have fun programming, everyone, and I will see you guys on the internet. Take it easy.